Let's get this show on the road. Thank you, everybody. Like I mentioned, good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're joining us today. My name is Mar Tang. I'm the field CISO here at Pentera, and I have the privilege of being joined by Jorge Orchilles from Principal Instructor at SANS. So, a quick intro on myself. I've been here with Pentera for about 4 years, and I've been in the industry for about 15 years and spent most of that time working and engineering different types of defensive technologies from security information event management to data loss prevention and multi-factor authentication, network detection response, endpoint detection response, and spent a lot of time also in the privileged identity space. And then finally got an opportunity to put on the attacker's hat, and I've been here with Pentera for about 4 years now, working and strategizing with all of our customers and anybody who wants to look at their network like the attacker. I'm here to help strategize. George, you have a very extensive background, so I'll let you introduce yourself. And thank you for
Thank
joining me
you.
here this morning.
Yeah. Hello. I love the international audience. Hello to all of you. Good morning, evening, whatever time it is, or if you're watching the recording, hello from the past, I guess. My name is Jorge Orchilles. I am a principal instructor at SANS. I've been teaching there for over 15 years, all the offensive security courses. I actually wrote the Security 5, what's today, Security 565, Red Team Operations and Adversary Emulation. So very much what we're going to talk about today. I run a team. I work for a company called Verizon. For those in the US, you've probably heard of it. And the team's called Readiness and Proactive Security, which is very much in line with what we're going to talk today as well. There, I run exposure and vulnerability management, penetration testing, red team, purple team, and an AI red team. So happy to be here with you, Jay. And, we talked about when we prep. This is like one of our favorite subjects. So please, let's make this interactive. The chat's on. We already know where you're from, so feel free to ask us any questions as we go, and we hope you enjoy.
Yeah, and we'll definitely leave some time at the end for questions also. So today's session is called Lessons from the Past, Actions for the Future, Proactive Ransomware Resilience. And I think we spend a lot of time in security trying to build a layered defense, which of course is necessary. But there's been so much talk also, and I agree with this statement, right? So from a degree where it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And I sincerely hope that none of you ever see anything remotely resembling this window here. And this picture has been quite popular since 2017 when WannaCry, I would say, hit the world. And it's been floating around ever since. But I want everyone to take a look at this and think just for a minute, what would this mean for your business if you saw something like this on your screen, or all of a sudden you got pings from your help desk and this was showing, and now you're locked up, right? And I guess what we're going to be discussing today is, can we shift this mindset away from it's not a matter of if but when, and actually feel more enabled to do something with our security posture, and not have to worry or be up at night about ransomware. And George, I'm going to pose a question for you just to start that we'll revisit at the end. But the burning question I think on everyone's mind is, do we pay when we see this?
That's the tough question that we'll see who can answer that. I mean, I think everyone wants to answer no, but it's really based on how prepared you are. And hopefully by the end of this and through a lot of testing and from tabletops to actually running things like Pentera, right, we can have a better answer when we're done with this webinar. And hopefully, again, like it hopefully doesn't happen, but it can, right? I remember 2017 when this happened. I saw some folks on from London. It's actually started over there. They started seeing it, and then we started seeing it over here. It was a bad day. It was a bad day for cybersecurity.
Yeah. We actually have a comment, it's as a community to normalize not paying. And I'm not going to address this now. We'll address it at the end, but I tend to agree. But let's talk about it because I think it will really vary based on, are you ready, right? As we like to say here, are you ransomware ready? So I actually have a question for all of you in the chat. How many of you have actually experienced a ransomware incident? And it's more than a yes no, right? Because either you have or you haven't. But did you, if you did, like, did you mitigate it in time?
Yeah, and it's a tough one too because if people know we're in cybersecurity, they might be your friends that work at another company and they're not even in IT, right? They could be an accountant over at this other company and they go to log in and oh my gosh, they get that screen and everyone's scrambling. They call you because they know you're in cybersecurity.
You
Hey,
become their
what,
their
what do
man.
I do? What do I do? Because they have absolutely no idea, right? So I see someone said I experienced it secondhand. That could be a similar story to the example I gave.
Yeah, that's actually, I should have put that as a choice because you hear about things, right? Or as we'll talk about, maybe you were unknowingly or unwillingly a victim of it, right? Downstream. Let's see if we can get the results here on the screen. Okay. Let's see. Hopefully all of you voted. Oop, I lost my, can't see the results. Let's give it a second here. Okay. Well, let's move on. Keep that in mind as the real mindset here is, again, I think I'm seeing 61% actually said they have not. So that's actually pretty good when more than half have not experienced it. I hope that's really the case. I mean, when we look at trends, and we'll talk a little about here momentarily, we see a proliferant amount of attacks inside, or I should say, across the industry. So very good, and I'm happy that most of you have not. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about the history of ransomware, right? How long has it been around? What have we seen in the past? Some interesting points from 2024. Now that we're in 2025, what did we see last year, and what can we glean from it? We'll talk about some of those entry points and TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures that we can learn along the way. And then we'll really talk about shifting to a proactive mindset and why that's absolutely beneficial. And then, like I mentioned, I'm getting a lot of good energy from you all. I think there's going to be a lot of good questions. We'll save some time at the end for Q&A.
Let's do it.
Wow. So, George, it's crazy when I was looking at the slide and just going over things. We have a really, I hate to even say it like this, but a really long and rich history of ransomware, starting as early as 1989, not 18, 1989 with the AIDS Trojan, where Dr. Joseph Pop, who was interestingly enough an evolutionary biologist, he spread this on floppy disks, if any of you remember that, those little things.
The
Floppy
save
disks.
icon. The save
Yeah, the
icon.
save icon. Yeah, the save icon now, right? As it's known for. He actually spread this around to the World Health Organization conference attendees, and the whole guise of it was looking for AIDS information, right? And then after a certain amount of reboots, I believe the code would run, and it would be locked up. The computer would be locked up, and actually, the first payment here was only $189 to a post office box in Panama. But very interesting in the fact that it was, guess what, using social engineering, tricking people get to install something, in this case, the floppy disk, and then it would run. Fast forward to 2010, we're no longer talking actual dollars and money because now we have the birth of Bitcoin. So now we have this virtual money, right? This virtual currency. And 2013, we moved to crypto locker. Now we're seeing malicious email attachments, and that's going to be kind of a common thread. Even when we move into 2016 with Locky and Petya, malicious emails is how they're getting around and spreading. I not that I like this, but I like the fact that Petya was kind of the satellite in GoldenEye, one of my favorite movies. We moved to 2017, where now we're seeing different variants. We're seeing not Petya. We're talking about Wiper ransomware and WannaCry and really threat sponsored attacks, really damaging stuff.
Yeah.
Um,
Those were bad because they were replicating by themselves too, right? It wasn't
right.
email anymore. It was the eternal blue vulnerability,
Yes.
right? That a lot of people hadn't patched. And that was an interesting set of events. Back in January 2017, the US government sent one of those notices back then, right? This was before CISA even existed, of like,
Yeah.
hey, you all should disable SMBv1. And everyone's like, okay, that's weird that you're doing this. Then in March, Microsoft patched a SMB vulnerability. And then, 2, 3 months later, when everyone should have been patched, this thing hits and it replicates by itself. And that was the game changer there.
Yeah, spread like wildfire, and you're absolutely correct, right? It was a public bulletin, and it was just like, oh, and now all of a sudden, you think you have patch management in place. We have another phrase here. We like to call it patch perfect. Like, could you ever be patch perfect? It's challenging, right? It's not an easy quest, but yeah, spread like crazy. And then, we turn the corner here, so to speak. And in around 2019, we see ransomware as a service really come into the mainstream where we saw some of that before, but now we're really seeing it all over the place. And it's a little just mind-boggling to me that you can just, go on the dark web. You don't even have to be an expert. And it's kind of like, hey, I want a ransomware kit, or I want this, or I want that. And you're also now seeing some new, I would say a new playbook almost, so to speak. For example, with Maze, seeing double extortion, right? It's not just a matter of we're going to encrypt your files. We're also going to exfiltrate and try and leak them. So you have more than one reason to pay. Um,
A wild one with Conti around this time was that they had this internal fight, like they're operating as
yeah.
businesses, and they leak their run book, like exactly step by step how they operated, and that helped us, right? Because we were then able to grab that and emulate these things ourselves and better prepare. So, well, yeah, they stole a lot of money, that Conti leak, and their like internal beef with each other actually helped us and allowed us to kind of pave the way of what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, and it's very also interesting to think that threat actors it's run like a business, right? There's rules, there's a protocol, things to do, things to not do, and then of course, like you said, right, you have almost malicious insiders, Duke, and releasing that information. What we're also seeing too is that with Conti, we started seeing other tactics like targeting VPNs, RDPs, and of course the unpatched servers, right? I mean the low-hanging fruit for attackers. We also see, our evil. We're starting to see supply chain instances as well, and then we move to 2021, and wow, we
This is
start to
the one
see,
that like everyone heard about ransomware, right? At least
yeah,
the one in the US with the Colonial Pipeline, right? There was like panic, people thinking they weren't going to be able to pump gas. And, I see a lot of internationals, but we drive a lot here in the US and we use a lot of gas. And this was like half of the United States panicking about not being able to put gas. This was definitely that one, where everyone definitely heard about ransomware because of it, right?
yeah. And I saw pictures of people filling up bags. It was wild. So we're seeing now the mainstream, folks like you and I, everyone here on the line who are not in the industry getting hit. LockBit comes into play now. We're seeing different TTPs like disabling security tools and backup solutions, which we'll touch upon later. Now let's fast forward to 2023, right? And we have Black Cat, Alpha V, the MGM attack, people not able to check into their hotel rooms right after Black Hat, ESXi getting hit now, which is also somewhat new. And we move forward to 2024, which we'll talk about here momentarily, where we see a takedown of Lockbit. But does it really matter, right? If threat actors are being taken down or not? And we also see a very big impact with the supply chain, which we'll define momentarily. And then we can kind of look into 2025 where we are, right? When we look at the latest players, Ransom Hub, right, and how proliferate they were and they were at the end of 2024 coming into this year.
Yeah. And on these, right, like the Colonial Pipeline, MGM, right, people not being able to gamble in the casino, Change Healthcare, which I think affected 1 out of every 3 people in the US. Like people couldn't go to the doctor, they couldn't get their medicine, right? It's affecting people's daily life now. I also believe last year there was one with Starbucks was affected, and then there was one
Yep.
that was Krispy Kreme, right? You're messing with our donuts. And that one, I told my daughter the other day, that was a sticky situation. Sorry, no more dad jokes.
All
But
good.
that was in the news today because they reported their numbers. Last year, they had 2.3 million in profit. This year, after that attack that affected their ability to sell donuts, their core business, they actually posted $22 million in losses. So not all, of course, attributed to this ransomware attack, but that's a lot of money. The 1 year that you got hit by ransomware, right? And yeah, sorry, Kyle. I feel like you liked it, or maybe you didn't like the joke. I don't know. We'll see. I might throw another one in there towards the end, see if you're paying attention.
I welcome. I think it will keep people awake. So another pro, I have a quiz now, or just what do you think, right? What was the most affected industry in 2024 from ransomware? If we can get the poll up here again. So I'm not sure if the poll is showing, but think about it. Now we talked about Change Healthcare. Now, to be fair, right? We're a little biased. We're Americans, so we see American news, etc. Um, and that it did make a lot of mainstream news. But what do you think the most effective industry is in 2024? I'm seeing government at 48%. Okay. Business services at 42. Ah, here we go. Here's results. So retail at 32%, business services at 45%, manufacturing 25%. Notice how I didn't even put healthcare's not even in here, right? And the reason is, right? Thank you for this. Thank you for participating. This is from our friends at CyberInt. Actually, business services was the top industry in 2024, followed by retail, and then followed by manufacturing. And when you think about it, it makes sense because a lot of the where's the money, right? You follow the money. And if organizations, we see this even from a likelihood perspective, if the more revenue you make as an industry, the more likelihood the more your likelihood is to rise because you have money to pay. And funny enough, right, healthcare is on the list, but and healthcare is absolutely hit. But what's interesting is that some threat actors try to be ethical, like criminals, and they don't want to always hit healthcare because it's like almost like taboo. Again, this is mixed, right? Crime is crime. Uh, but okay, so let's talk about 2024.
But
So
it's
what are
everyone,
some
right? Everyone got affected, right? There was no industry was left behind. Like
right, exactly.
in one
Across the
shape.
board.
And we can no longer say it's not going to happen to me, right? I think we've established that as an industry. The old days of they won't come after me because there's nothing for them to steal, like that's gone, right? We have accepted that you're going to get targeted, you're going to get hit. It's just a matter of when, and let's be prepared, right?
Exactly. And preparation is really key. So when we look at 2024, now let's talk about, yeah, that supply chain. So Change Healthcare at this point, right, the largest healthcare data breach in the US, over 100 million individuals affected. And we also, and supply chain means more than one thing, right? Supply chain is who are we doing business with, but also are we leveraging technology in our own environments? Are we part of a supply chain that could lead to, I guess, threat actors crossing the perimeter, right? We look at CLOP at the end of the year of 2024. with the Clio managed file transfer,
And
as well
still
as a
to this day, right? Like they're still dropping that list.
yeah.
And I don't even think they're done. I haven't really kept up with it, but I did see, I think they dropped like another set of folks. All because of one vulnerability, right? There's one vulnerability, and that last year we had the Move It one, right? Same group, just
Yep.
different vulnerability. But yeah, this was a wild one.
Exactly, right? You're using software. Is that unintentionally or unwillingly, are we not, if we're not patching, or if there's something else happening there that is or a risk that we're inheriting, right, from another organization, is that going to put us at risk as an organization? So a lot of downstream impact, whether it's that or whether it was Blue Yonder with all of a sudden I saw Starbucks in the news. I was like, oh my gosh, did Starbucks get hit? It wasn't necessarily Starbucks, right? But their payment systems were down. And it puts us in the mindset of, well, how can we prepare for that? Now, what was interesting is that payments were down by 35%, right, in 2024 from 2023. And I think that is directly because we saw law enforcement take down some of the major groups. But, right, if you're familiar with the way affiliates work, you can almost think of it as like a Grubhub model, right? And now here in the States, right, we have a service called Grubhub. And if I'm feeling lazy and I don't want to cook, I can go on Grubhub, order food. Someone goes, picks up my food, and delivers it to me. Well, and Grubhub has certain rules, right? They can't eat my fries and they can't do that type of things. That's against the rules. But if someone does that, I can fire them, but they can go move to Uber Eats or do a different service. It's the same thing here, right? When we see LockBit getting taken down or Black Hat getting taken down, these affiliates can just move somewhere else. And now we're seeing Ransom Hub come into light. And it's very interesting. Ransom Hub has a 90-10 split for affiliates, which I thought was actually pretty interesting because that means affiliates, the ones actually doing the work, they're gonna get a lot of money from these attacks.
Yeah, and it's an interesting point which we actually didn't talk about during the history of it. Right? Like back in the day, it was like all just one group, and now it's almost three groups working together, right? You have the initial access brokers. Those are the
Hmm.
ones that like gain that initial access, right? With some of these things like these vulnerabilities with the vulnerabilities on internet facing systems or phishing, etc. And then the affiliates are going in, doing a lot of the manual work, moving around the environment, getting to the point that they can deploy the ransomware. And then you have the ransomware as a service giving you that malware. So it's like it's not even one group anymore. It's three different groups that you're fighting against in each one of these. And that's why with MITRE ATT&CK, which of course all of you know, they came out with campaigns instead of just groups, because back in the day we were just emulating groups, and now we have to emulate the campaign end to end, which we're going to talk about here as well. But yeah, big shifts in how this it continues to evolve. It's like a business. It's like they set the vision at the beginning of the year and their goals, and then they go after them, and some wild stuff.
It is pretty wild, and we're seeing a decentralized model of the kill chain, exactly like you said. It's being split up, and it's getting really niche. And for us as security practitioners, it's really making it tough. Now, we saw a spike in Q4, though, right? A lot of victims, and it kind of brings me into George, what you were just saying, right? What are we seeing from entry points and TTPs, and that sort of thing? And you know what? There is still a very large common denominator here where use of stolen credentials or hitting, open RDP or compromising VPN, compromising externally facing assets first, or social engineering, right? Once you can compromise that identity, and especially if that identity is missing multi-factor authentication, you can very easily cross that perimeter.
Yeah,
And
that's a big point, right? Like back in the day, it was like all about the vulnerability, right? Like that was the sexy thing, was find an exploit and get in. And then there was like the shift to identity and social engineering, right? And now it's like it's both. Like you can't focus on one, you got to focus on both, because there are going to be vulnerabilities on your edge, but there's also going to be lack of MFA on your edge. There's going to be reused passwords on your edge. Like we can't ignore these anymore and be like, hey, they're getting in this way, so let's only focus on that. We're going to have to be prepared for all of these.
Yeah. And I think it's almost like a matter of, I like to think of it as hygiene, right? You brush your teeth, or I hope, right? You brush your teeth daily, daily, maybe multiple times per day. You floss and do all those types of things. And when we realize, or if we can glare at and say, okay, this is originally what's happening. We can stop things earlier in in the intrusion kill chain. But to your point, George, right? There's also these other aspects that we should also be diligent about. Whether once they cross the perimeter, what happens? And the mindset here is when we look at the timeline of what occurs, right? We have the big boom where the screen gets encrypted, help desk, right, law enforcement maybe calls you or who knows, right? And then all the craziness happens with forensic investigation and your stock, if you're a public company, right? Your stock takes a tank and you have to notify your everyone or the people you do business with or your customers, etc. What we're suggesting is shifting left of boom into more of this threat prevention space. And how can we live in this highlighted area when we start talking about the TTPs, right? And when we think about assume breach mindset, we're living here, right? We want to make sure, right? We're talking about they're getting in, we know how they're getting in, but we also want to be prepared. How can we proactively play in this space and make sure that we're shifting left? And we want to minimize that. I like to think of it as dwell time, right? So I define dwell time as the time at which an intrusion begins up until which the intrusion is actually discovered. And George, I really want your opinion here because when we want to shift to a proactive mindset here, this is where you really specialize. I'm a big advocate of it. This is why I work here at Pentera. I think it's always important to start with the why, like the mindset. And we've been talking about it, but if I was going to see you in the elevator, I asked you what you do, why are you so passionate about being proactive?
Yeah, because it's a matter of when, not a matter of if, right? And we kind of mentioned that earlier on. I really want that to drive home, right? It's going to happen. You're going to get breached. It's about how quickly you can and how prepared you are to identify that and contain it, remediate it, right? Go through the incident response process. And I often do an example of like a firefighter, right? If you call, if there's a fire and you have to call 911 or the fire department, who shows up? You expect them to be trained at this. You expect them to have done this multiple times, right? But it's not really ideal for you to be calling, Mandy or whatever company all the time when a lot of this you can do yourself, right? It's your house. Isn't it better that you know where the fire extinguisher is and you know how to operate that and that you've actually done it so that when the time comes, you're not figuring out like how to pull the pin out and actually point it. You are prepared for it. So the why is all about preparation, being ready for when the inevitable happens, right? We're not going to be able to patch all the vulnerabilities as soon as they come out. You're going to have vulnerabilities. I've been doing this for decades now, and we need to focus on the areas that will really give us the bang for the buck. And a lot of that is not, obviously prevention is the goal, but response is a must. So that's my why on why proactive.
It's a really good analogy with the fire. Funny enough, I didn't feel confident that I'd be fuddling around with my fire extinguisher. I actually bought a fire blanket just in case.
Oh yeah,
So
those good.
those things put fires out immediately, right? But it's a great analogy because yeah, you want to have, and it's also right. It's talking about different mitigative techniques, right? You have the extinguisher, you have the blanket, and in continuing with that analogy, right? If we're talking about fires and fighting fires, right, we could think of the source or how the fire is fueled or how it's spread. And it brings me to the next point here where threat actors are for a long time they've been using living off the land techniques. We're seeing somewhat of a shift. What have you seen in your experience with threat actors, or what are some of the things that you do, right, in your proactive type of testing?
Yeah, no, for sure we've seen this, right? So it was, again, back in the day, you could like even use Metasploit, right? Everyone's heard of Metasploit. Back in the day when it was pen testing in the 2000s, 2010s, you found a vulnerability, you fired up Metasploit, you sent that, you get an interpreter shell back, no alerts anywhere, right? Obviously, you can't do that today. And it's because Meterpreter is malware, right? And the threat actors kind of figured out that we have improved, right? I think everyone has moved from antivirus that was very, signature based to EDRs, right? Endpoint detection and response. So if I were to create my own custom malware right now and drop it on an EDR, I'd have to do a ton of work to not get detected. So threat actors, just like us, are kind of lazy. Like, why are they going to spend all this time figuring out an EDR bypass for, whatever EDR you want or you have? Instead, you have these systems, Windows, Linux, and Mac, that already have tools available for them to use. So instead of dropping a custom command and control payload like an Empire or a Cobalt Strike, why don't I just use SSH? SSH exists on the system. It's probably used by admins. So you're kind of blending in. And that's what living off the land is. And this project started as living off the land binaries at DerbyCon, a great conference that isn't around anymore. And then it turned into LOLBAS, living off the land binaries and scripts, to now there's all these other LOL projects. There's like LOL tunnels, LOL AWS, LOL cloud, LOL this, LOL drivers, right? Because drivers run as admin and attackers can bring in a driver, which your computer won't see as malicious because it's a driver. It's supposed to tell you the hardware how to work. And then they use that to escalate privileges. And then not just LOL living off the land, right? What's on there. Now we're seeing a shift, and we had a couple of slides ago, to RMM, right? So your help desk has some way of remotely helping your employees, right? Like you, in this mobile workforce we live in today, right? After the pandemic, particularly, there are legit ways to do that. And your EDR cannot flag like ConnectWise, for example, as malware because that is a legitimate tool. So we keep seeing these shifts, and us, all of us, all the attendees, Jay, myself, right? We are keeping up with them, right? We need to know what they're doing, how they're evolving, so that then we can test it, right? And you might say, well, yeah, ConnectWise isn't malware, but I don't use it. So maybe in your environment, you can block it, right? And this is where the one size fits all just doesn't fit all, right? These are things you need to do in your environment to improve and be proactive, right? Like that, this is all about being proactive.
Completely agree, and I think this testing, I'm curious, and this is something that comes up in a lot of our conversations. This testing, where do we test, right? Do we test in a lab? Do we test in production? And I want to get your take on it, and then I also to give my take on. Well, I'll just say I think testing in production. It's here on the slide. I think testing in production is absolutely necessary.
Yeah. And this again goes back in the day, right? When we started doing pen testing, particularly web app pen testing and like a SQL injection vulnerability. There's that famous XKCD, right? Of little Bobby tables. We didn't test web apps in prod because we didn't want to bring them down. But we've evolved, right? We're not testing this web app now. We're testing all these systems. We're testing people. We're testing process and technology. So where your EDR is, where that EDR alert is going, or your NDR, your XDR, whatever marketing term we're using today, that is in production. Your analyst, if you have a SOC or if you have an MSSP, they are seeing the production, Splunk or Chronicle or Elastic, or whatever SIM, right? So doing that in production is a real representation. Unless you have your entire environment cloned, you have like the digital twins and all that. Even then, I would still say test in production because that's what they're going after. They're probably not going after your non-prod.
I completely agree. And here we're big advocates of it. Um, Here at Pentera, right, we feel confident testing in production because we're reverse engineering and re-engineering exploits to be safe, so we don't cause kernel panics and that sort of thing. So, um, because that's always the challenge, which brings me to another point here, is that you have to work with other business owners and leaders when you're in security, unless you're doing everything yourself, which is, the case, and a lot of the times. What are some of the challenges? Because challenges I see is just pushback. Have you experienced that, George, in your day to day trying to smooth things over with other individuals?
Yeah, and then someone just actually asked that about users as well, right? And that's the thing, right? It's people, process, and technology. And the more you do this, the more you practice, the better it is, right? It's like a sporting event, right? If you're an athlete, maybe you were back in high school, right? You didn't just go and play games on the weekends. You trained, right? That mentality needs to exist here. You have to train. If you don't train, then yeah, you're gonna get a bunch of challenges that you just never thought were gonna come up. The first time you do an exercise, you're going to have challenges. You're going to write them down. You're going to figure out how to get around them. And then the next time you do it, you're going to learn something else. And then the next time you're going to learn something else. So you're always going to be learning. And these challenges are going to come all across the board, right? There's going to be a lot of challenges for you, but you have to practice. And the more the practice, the less thing.
Yeah, it's true. And one of those challenges, for example, and I'll mention here, you can't talk about ransomware without talking about backups, but not just backing up, restoring them. Because you don't have a true resilient strategy unless you've actually gone through it and you've restored them. It's very, very, very critical to do that. I think just advocating for resiliency, you have to you have to just restore. And it was important for us to actually put that on here to say, like, this should be part of your proactive ship. Proactive is proactively testing everything, not just TTPs, which we'll talk about, but also your backup strategies and your DR
Yeah,
strategies.
and that reminds me back before I was even in security, I was an IT admin and I was doing consulting and this company swore that they were doing backups. They called me in to help them restore and we found out that they weren't actually backing up correctly and we couldn't restore. So yeah, definitely test this stuff out. The more you test, the better prepared you'll be.
Cool. So let's talk a little bit about some of that testing, right? When we look at ransomware, we saw that they're getting in multi-factor authentication, not being on identities, using compromised or stolen credentials, uh, the edge devices, perimeters, and once they're in, right, we can look at the way ransomware actually behaves. And yes, there's going to be file encryption. There's going to be communication to command and control. There might be destruction of those backups or an attempt to. Um, Service termination, etc. But which services and some of those differences may vary. But keeping this in mind can help us as security professionals be proactive. Now, here at Pentera, the proactive mindset is bolstered by the fact that you can leverage automation to get this done. Now, some of you might have the privilege or of having like very talented individuals already doing this, which is great. If you do, amazing. What we're looking to do here at Pentera is help boost that, right, with the automation, be almost, a force multiplier, right, tool in the toolbox to get this done. And when you think about the attackers, if they're in, right, once they cross that perimeter, what are they going to do? Well, they need to do reconnaissance, understand what machines are touchable and reachable. They need to look for specific vulnerabilities, whether that's vulnerabilities like CVEs or even misconfigurations. They're going to look for those identities, try and crack passwords. And the reason is that you have clear text credentials, you could do much, much more and be proliferate, especially when we think about ransomware, right? Being able to move laterally is very important because then if you can move laterally and maintain persistence, you could actually just, spread that ransomware everywhere and then hit the red button and then everything is going to be encrypted. Um, Data gathering, pivoting, privilege escalation, like I mentioned, all part of this life cycle. And if we can leverage the automation to do that, then we can help scale and feel confident that we're not just covering a portion of the environment if we're, you know, underwater with our tasks and trying to get so much in the environment covered. We can use automation to fully cover that. Now, and a question was asked before about, users, right, being the biggest vulnerability. I agree. And it's not just a matter of training, which of course should be done, but users are going to be users. They're going to click links. They're going to make mistakes. But I think that being proactive and thinking about a proactive mindset, when we start talking about the readiness blueprint, I'll mention that here. So, what is a blueprint? If I were to give everyone a playbook, right, of how you can be proactive. Well, the first thing you need to do is absolutely validate your surface solidity, right? And the surface, is it solid or is it porous? We want to make sure we don't have things like, hey, SMB ports open, right? We talked, George and I talked about in the beginning about how SMB was open and it caused or allowed WannaCry to just be so proliferate. This is low-hanging fruit that we want to not only make sure that ports are open, but are they active? Same thing, RDP. You see 3389 open on the outside. Why? Should it be? Is it protected with MFA? These are things that you can proactively do to test and probe, as well as actually, launch payloads to see if vulnerabilities are real. It's not just a matter of, is it potential? We want to validate, make sure that they're either active or they're not active. Now, here's where we talk about the users, right? If we're concerned with users, especially when we talk about supply chain, if we're concerned about identities coming inside the environment, we want to validate whether or not credentials, well, are they active? But more importantly, do they have privilege? We want to make sure we follow least privilege inside the environment, and we can test in order to do so we know what the risk is. So, for example, if George is coming in from whatever company, he's doing work, what does he have access to? Should he have that access? Because if an attacker compromises his identity, which we know they're going to do by one way or the other, what is going to be the blast radius of that risk? And what will they be able to do? Then we can start testing and to see, are we going to upload malware, or can we use those living off the land types of techniques, and will that be detected? Living off the land, of course, is a little bit harder to spot. But there are ways to get around that as well, which we'll talk about momentarily. Generating encryption keys, creating mutex objects, creating configurations in the registry, right? Now, who's doing this? This is where it becomes an understanding of who typically does what inside the environment, right? So if you're talking about PowerShell or whichever, and you're seeing PowerShell being executed by users that don't normally do that, that's anomalous. So this is where user behavior analytics can come into play. This is where baselining or user behavior can come into play, because if you see deviations from that, or if you have, for example, a known good whitelist of users that do it, it's part of their job, and you see someone else doing that, that should raise a red flag, right? That should immediately be, hey, something weird is happening inside the environment. And proactively testing with this, right, whether your team is doing it or you're leveraging a tool like Pentera, can proactively test the SOC to see how quickly they respond. And are they going to see it in the first place? And if not, right, we can sit down and say, look, here's what we did. We didn't see it. Let's figure out why, and let's take a look, because this is where the purple teaming mindset comes into play. Injecting into process injection, typical of trying to evade EDR. Is the EDR going to see it? If it does, great. If it doesn't, we have to figure out why. But being able to keep track of all of this with an audit trail, along with terminating backup services, right? This is what we started to see with LockBit, like I mentioned earlier. This is what ransomware families are doing. And we want to mimic those TTPs, including enumerating files and including encrypting files. And there is ways of doing
Yeah.
this. Go ahead, George.
Yeah, no, and some of these, right, are probably not that bad that the EDR is going to alert you on, right? So when we say, can the EDR see it, it might actually log it, which is great. But then that means that your analyst or your SOC or whoever's, the watchers may miss it, right? And that's where the people part comes in as well. It's like, hey, look at this entire chain of things that happen. It should have triggered something, and where did it not trigger, right? Like those are the opportunities of improving. and then running it again, which I know Pentera allows you to do very easily, and seeing that improvement from the first time where, enumerating a host might not be that bad, but with all this other stuff that's going on in that system, it surely should be alerting.
Yeah.
Sorry for interrupting there because
No, no, it drives the point home perfectly, right? Drives the point home is that you're not going to know until you start doing it. And it's like we said before, right? We're going to see challenges, we're going to see things pop up that we didn't even know about. Oh, we didn't even know that EDR wasn't on this this machine, or maybe it was in monitor mode, or maybe it was falsely reporting that it was live and it wasn't, right? All these things are things that we've actually seen. So it's just not a matter of on off, right? There's a lot of nuance that comes along with that that you only see when you start testing, and you start testing continuously. I want to quickly, as we, start to bring this to a close, George, what do you like to see from your defenders when you start proactively, shifting? What do you like to see when you work with the team?
Yeah, so right, we're in cybersecurity. You've seen here, right? Like we started, and the reason we went through the evolution of this is because things change, right? What we're seeing today isn't what we're going to see tomorrow. And we're all in cybersecurity, so we're all learning. That's one of the beauties of cybersecurity. That's why we all love it. We're always learning. So while today your team might be good and catch, some living off the land, tomorrow there might be something new that they are not aware of. So what I want to see them is always learning, always leveraging that threat intelligence to keep up and maybe even be the ones looking forward, right? We're in the offensive space. So some of our jobs is to foresee what's going to come next, right? And RMM is one that we definitely got ahead of. We did a purple team on that a year and a half ago, and now we're starting to see way more of it. So, you have to continually do this, right? Partner with someone like Pentera that will keep you at that leading edge, right? So that you're always learning, always improving, because just because you feel safe today that you're going to catch something doesn't mean they're going to change tomorrow and you might not see them.
Totally. And completely appreciate that feedback. And actually, Sylvester, it's funny, right? I would say my take on pen testing tools, that's what we're here for, right? That's what Pentera is here for. And using the automation here will absolutely help you scale. So before we open it up for some questions, let's just summarize this, because we actually plowed through this hour, which was really fun just to talk about all these different things. But so what are some of the key takeaways here? Well, one, ransomware has been around for a long time and unfortunately doesn't show signs of stopping. So this is something that we're just going to have to live with. It's almost like COVID, right? It's like, all right, COVID's here. It's not going away, right? Just be proactive, take your vitamins, exercise, be healthy, and that's how you can be proactive, right? And what's interesting about this is that the groups may change, right? It might be Ransom Hub today, it might be some other group tomorrow, but the TTPs and the entry points remain similar. To that point, focus on low-hanging fruit. One, you have to understand your attack surface. That means both externally and internally. What can attackers see? And minimize the things they're going to take advantage of. Minimize, for example, RDP. Ensure users have multi-factor authentication so that they can't just be compromised. Get an understanding of what credentials have been exposed on the outside. Also, another great way you can be proactive. Those compromised credentials are going to be an attacker's best friend. But also, backup and restore, please. Please, 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 please restore. But the biggest takeaway here is test proactively, right? Use in your testing living off the land types of techniques. In doing so, right, if you have a successful attack, turn that into a tabletop exercise. Make sure the business understands what they need to do in times of crisis so that they're prepared. Test in production with systems. I know it's scary, but believe me, it can be done and it can be done safely. So please feel free to either find me or engage us here at Pentera, and we're happy to talk about how we can do it in production, so that there's no CrowdStrike moment, no blue screens, no nothing, right? And the biggest thing, right? Test to see the SOC responsiveness. to the indicators of compromise, right? So we're talking about all this stuff. When you're testing, you want to make sure the SOC can see it and the SOC can respond. Understand the challenges. You don't want to wait for a live real attack to find out where your gaps are. That's the worst case you could be in. If you test proactively, you will be ready in time. It's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. And that mindset will help you be ready in times of crisis. And as you test continuously, you drill continuously, you'll get stronger and stronger and stronger. Like when you go to the gym or you train martial arts, the more you do it, the stronger you'll get. So this has been, you guys have been really interactive. George, I want to thank you for answering some of these questions as well in the chat and being proactive about it. Let's see what other pieces of feedback we have here before we wrap up.
As uh as questions come in, or we can answer live some of the ones I already answered. It's cool when it's two of us talking, because then like I was able to chat and answer questions here as well. But here's the
Well,
dad joke that I promised. Think one person appreciated, so that's all I need to get another one in there. The question is, where did all the hackers go? Where did all the hackers go? I don't know, Jay. They must have ran somewhere.
I wonder where they went.
They ran somewhere.
Let's
Very,
actually, George, real quick for you, right? Just we started this at the do we pay, right? That was the question I asked you. Do we pay? So going through this, right? What's your stance on it? And then we can, chat about it here in the last couple
yeah,
minutes.
and then some people wrote this on the chat, and I agree 100%. Like, do not pay. Let's normalize not paying, right? Don't pay, don't pay, don't pay. Everyone on this call doesn't want to pay. But guess what? Probably no one on this call actually makes that decision, right?
Mm,
And that is why the planning for this and doing the exercises, both from a technical hands-on perspective with something like Pentera, to even just tabletops with your most senior folks, right? And yes, include your cyber insurance if you have that, right? And we won't go into a cyber insurance talk because I don't want to bore you. But the answer of pay or not pay is going to be over our heads, right? It's going to be a CEO making that call, because they have to decide whether they're going to sell donuts that day, or uh, wait for that restore to occur. And that restore hasn't happened in years, and the folks trying to restore don't even know how to, right? So be prepared. Be prepared for the answer being, a we're going to pay. It could be the board making the decision, could be a C-level person making the decision, but your job, if you believe you shouldn't pay, is be prepared so that you don't have to.
yeah, I completely agree. It's always a business decision. The more ready and I don't know, right? This is where it becomes a challenge where you need to be proactive and try and champion the message of security up. And security, unfortunately, is not often seen as a business enabler. I would argue that there can be many conversations. In fact, we have and have been having conversations with organizations to show return on investment or business value for a proactive solution like Pentera. If you feel passionately about this, I would say talk to us. We can show you what a ransomware attack looks like in your environment. We come in for a day. And if you're curious about that, right? And if you're curious about whether or not you're ransomware ready, hit us up, engage us, find me on LinkedIn or talk to us. We'd be more than happy to come in, not only run through the engagement, but if you need help talking to upper management and getting executive buy-in, we can absolutely help with that too. Another question I think we had here was where do we start a program of testing? And I think it goes back to what we were just saying, right? If it's a business decision, start with critical assets. That's where you should start, right? Testing and proactively testing. What else do we have here? Upper management. Yep. If you want to get upper management on board, absolutely start talking to them about what would happen if we were locked up. What would this mean for our business? And see how they respond. And if they don't,
And that's where tabletops are very helpful, right? They don't have to be long, they don't have to be technical. but get them thinking about this as well.
Yep. So this is all really good feedback, great questions. I want to thank we're almost here at the top of the hour. I want to thank everyone for giving me both your time and your energy this morning. George, thank you so much for joining me on here. This was a lot of fun, really great feedback. I really appreciate you helping us talk to the folks here on the line. If any of this has interested you, please visit us on Pentera.io. Reach out to me, like I said, on LinkedIn. Engage with us. We would love to get engaged with you. So thank you, everybody, for joining us this morning, this afternoon, this evening. Have a great rest of your day. Have a great rest of your week. And please stay secure.